Well, hello, welcome back to the channel. My name is Kay, and welcome to the Occult Tea Party, where we talk all about occultism, mysticism, esoteric history, and much more. So today is going to be a very fascinating topic, and this is actually one of the specific niche areas of esotericism that I have quite honestly studied for the last year. And so today we're going to be talking about the Rosicrucians. So sit back, grab your tea. We're going to be talking about secret societies today, and more specifically, a Christian secret society. So we're really pouring the tea today. It's piping hot. So the tea that I'm actually using today is sweet tea julep. It's an English breakfast tea. See if we can get it there. I'm not quite sure, but I think you can get it at, yes, petalsandpoison.com. Also, I completely forgot to show you guys this. This is actually a necklace that I made, and it actually has the Rosicrucian rose. Closer, maybe I'll put a clip in, but I decided to wear it today for our lovely topic on Rosicrucianism. And I've actually been making a lot of necklaces and selling them. This one actually already sold. I'm shipping her off tomorrow. But if you would like one, let me know. I put all my contact info down below. So what makes this so fascinating, I think, is because it is a niche topic and it's really not talked about a whole lot. You know, when we're looking at secret societies, or when people think of secret societies, they usually just automatically think of the Illuminati or, you know, Freemasonry. But the precursor to both of these things is actually the Rosicrucians. And so we're going to kind of start off with, you know, who were the Rosicrucians? You know, what do you mean by Christian secret society? How is that a thing? And we're going to kind of be exploring the depths of the post, you know, Protestant Reformation, and things like that. So we're kind of looking at early 17th century, and kind of what that time period looked like. But first, I want to try this tea because I'm very, very curious. It's quite lovely, actually. I feel like it could have had a little bit more. So the Rosicrucian movement essentially started in Germany, and some say that it actually started in England, but you know, generally it's agreed upon by scholars that it started in Germany. And so this society sort of emerged and kind of came out into the public through 3 anonymous manifestos. Essentially, they didn't really fully come out and say, hey, this is who we are, we're the Rosicrucians. It more so was, it was brought about through, you know, these anonymous publications that were very mysterious. And so it starts off with the Fama Fraternitatis, which was published around approximately 1610 to 1614, as well as we have the Confessio Fraternitatis, which was likely around 1615. And then we have the third Rosicrucian Manifesto, which is the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosicruits, which was published in 1616. You know, the depths of, you know, post-Reformation, as well as the 30 Years' War and things like that. So to kind of give you a historical sort of timeline, that's kind of what was going on during that time period, as well as we have the lovely Queen Elizabeth Stuart, King James's daughter, who was in reign for a winter with her winter king, Frederick V. So we have several different men that were sort of attributed to these manifestos, right? And so they kind of just appeared. Not only, you know, is this containing world history, but it's literally surrounding King James's daughter. And if you do not know who King James is, go pick up your Holy Bible and go look at King James Version Bible. Yeah, it's getting that serious. We're really actually getting into the tea here. To kind of give like a sort of broad understanding of, you know, who were the Rosicrucians and what were their teachings surrounding, I think what's really important to note is that what made Rosicrucianism and what kind of formed Rosicrucianism was these sort of movements that, you know, have spanned over several sort of centuries, particularly movements like Kabbalah, so a lot of Jewish mysticism as well as Christian mysticism. So a lot of, German mysticism was kind of very Christian in nature. And so I would say that really to understand the Rosicrucian movement and their manifestos, you would have to kind of study Christian mysticism and a lot of alchemy and these types of topics, because what the manifestos are talking about is Hermeticism, Kabbalah, alchemy, and things like that. To kind of understand this very mysterious movement is really to kind of look very deeply at the history. Actually, the Rosicrucians are probably one of the most mysterious secret societies that ever existed. So when the manifestos came out into the public, it really actually caused a huge uproar. A lot of people wanted to join this mysterious secret society in Germany. And they even appeared in Paris. They had like these posters on the walls of Paris, and they said, that they make their stay there, and that the chosen ones will be contacted, essentially. And it's quite humorous because, all of these people wanted to join, but they couldn't find the fraternity. But that kind of brings me to also note that through this, all these people trying to join, and just all of this uproar and things like that, through this, actually, there was a lot of backlash as well. I mean, given the time period that this, sort of arose, post, Protestant Reformation, it really did cause a backlash, of course, because during this time period, it was a tearing between, religion as well as this formation of science. But then mysticism is sort of like in that middle space. What's fascinating about this is right before the scientific revolution as well. So right before Isaac Newton comes in and the Royal Society of London comes in and things like that. But Isaac Newton actually as well, he actually looked into the manifesto supposedly. I know Francis Yates wrote about this, and I guess supposedly he had his own handwritten note on one of the translations of the manifestos that came a little later on, which I do find to be extremely, extremely fascinating, but also not surprising due to the fact that Isaac Newton was one of the last alchemists before the scientific revolution really took off and mysticism and science completely split. The Rosicrucians were heralding the movement of religion and science becoming one. What's super fascinating is the massive sort of humongous claims that they have in these manifestos. So of course everyone wanted to join when they heard this and when they read these manifestos. How could you not? If I came across this mysterious secret society that said we have the secrets of all of mankind, all the secrets of God and the universe, I'd be like, sign me up please, immediately. We're gonna kind of briefly talk about these manifestos so that we kind of get an idea of the manifestos themselves. So the core text, where it all began. So the first manifesto, the Fama Fraternitatis, this one actually is talking about the life and the travels of the mystical character of Brother CR, and he's actually the founder of the movement, who was born in 1378 and died in 1484. So he lived quite a long life. The Fama kind of takes off with talking about his travels. So Brother CR, he travels to parts of the Middle East, specifically Damascus and North Africa, specifically Fez, to learn from the sages and the wise men. And it was said that he actually was welcomed when he got there to these certain circles, and that he was expected. So he goes to these certain areas, as well as then he goes to Spain. So when we look at kind of the time period actually of this historically, it actually really lines up. And particularly in Spain is where Kabbalah actually took place. The beginnings of, Kabbalah becoming more out in the open. Because we see that, during this time period, the Zohar was published in Spain during this time. Essentially, we have this mystical character. He learns all of this knowledge from these wise men in the Middle East and parts of North Africa. Then he goes to Spain and he's preaching to people in Spain, and, the certain mystical circles there in Spain. And then we see he forms this, group of men And then he dies at the age of 106. And then on his tomb is inscribed, after 120 years I will be opened. So there's this very interesting sort of storyline here of, Rosicrucianism, like sort of the story behind it, how it began, how it was formed. So then it describes in the Manifesto the discovery of the tomb alongside with Brother CR's books and items. This began the reestablishment of the fraternity. So supposedly it actually was opened 120 years later, and there began the Rosicrucian movement. How cool and epic is that, right? So that's the first manifesto. Then we get into the Confessio. So the Confessio is actually sort of like an added on continuation of the Fama, and expands upon the fraternity's principal teachings and the plans for a utopian era, bringing about Christian liberation, as well as condemning the Pope of Rome as the Antichrist. So it gets really spicy. This second manifesto gets really, really spicy. So basically, the Confessio is like, all right, we're gonna really just come out and say it. The Pope of Rome is the Antichrist. It's all going down. So this manifesto essentially has a very apocalyptic tone to it. It's not only talking about the book of Revelations in this manifesto, but it's also talking about the Antichrist and, the prophecies and Revelations and things like that. So this one gets really juicy. And specifically, I actually kind of want to talk about this sort of anti-Catholic element to the manifestos, because I think it's really important. It does make sense due to the fact that this is a Protestant sort of movement. But it's also kind of humorous to me, I'm not even going to lie. So the Confessio states, like word for word, I have it quoted, "As we do now, all together, freely and securely, and without hurt, call the Pope of Rome the Antichrist, that which too herefore was held for deadly sin, and men in all countries were put to death for it. So we know certainly that the time shall come when that which has been kept secret we shall openly, freely, and with a loud voice publish and confess it before all the world." How epic is that? I need to take a sip of tea for this. That is tea. That is tea. Hold on, I'm gonna pour some more tea for this. That was tea. Wow. Wow. Their core teaching in this not only was this sort of apocalyptic, the end times are coming and all of humanity is gonna know the secrets, right? But as well as they were saying that humanity has this dire need to understand the scriptures. So it talks about the mysteries of the scriptures, specifically the book of Revelations, as well as it warns of the profanity of certain teachings that were circulating around this time. And that's what I find so funny, is that really at the heart of, Protestantism, there was so much mysticism surrounding this, and not just mysticism, but a secret society that King James was involved in. So there you have it. That is the two manifestos. And lastly, now we're going to get into the chemical wedding of Christian Rosicrucians. So this was the last manifesto that was published on the Rosicrucians. And this manifesto in particular was published and written by Johann Valentine Andre. He specifically claimed to have written the Alchemical Wedding of Christian Rosicrucians. And what's interesting about this is this manifesto specifically was written just a little bit later than the first two. And this manifesto specifically, he said, was written as a ludibrum. So essentially a hoax, a joke. And I find that to be quite fascinating, because the manifesto itself is essentially this alchemical allegory that takes place with the main figure, Christian Rosikreuz, or Rosenkreuz, which Rosenkreuz is Rosy Cross in German. And so this character, Christian Rosikreuz, he gets invited to this occult wedding, this royal wedding. And so it's quite fascinating, because we actually see through, the royal wedding of Queen Elizabeth Stuart and Frederick V as sort of that mirror. It kind of mimics that point in history. And something that's really important is that Frances Yates actually kind of connects the two. So she connects that movement with specifically these two royal characters. And what's really, really fascinating is that, you know, the Rosicrucians and these manifestos appeared during their reign. You know, there's a lot of alchemy in this, as well as, you know, the symbolism of it spanning 7 days correlates to the 7 stages of alchemy. But really, Christian Rosicrucian, he goes to this royal occult wedding, and he starts to encounter a lot of chaos. And he starts to see all these people get tested of their sort of worthiness of going to this royal occult wedding. It's a really beautiful text, I must say. I really do enjoy the text, as well as I do see why, it was also kind of like deemed as a ludibrum, like a sort of joke, because the text itself is very satire. It's a very satirical, literature. It is pretty humorous. It's actually really funny. The sort of jokeful, playful element of this movement is quite fascinating because, I personally see it as, it's kind of like jokes on you, you don't know, but we do type thing. But now that we kind of got into the manifestos and kind of briefly went over them, I think it's good to kind of go back really quickly and briefly to Johann Andre, and who was this man? And I think when you look into who he was and what he was surrounded by, it kind of gives us a clue of what kind of inspired the writing of the manifesto. This brings me to talk about a very mysterious manuscript called the Neometria. This work is actually supposedly said to contain a lineage to a mysterious Templar order. So if you do not know about the Knights Templars, it's really important to look into the Knights Templars, because when you go down this rabbit hole, it's going to lead to the Knights Templars. This was some sort of mysterious, meeting that happened, and it was supposedly of the lineage of the Knights Templars. It's really important to note as well that the Neometria was dedicated to King James I, as well as also the Neometria contains, its name means temple measurement. So we can kind of get that sort of like Freemasonry connection there as well. There was a lot of emphasis on the measurements of Solomon's temple. Isaac Newton was obsessed with it. He even tried to prophesy the end times with it and things like that. So this was very important because it kind of gives us a sort of inside scoop of what was influencing even men like Isaac Newton. But this manuscript kind of contained prophecies. As I think A.E. Wade wrote this, it's important to note that the Neometria very well could have also influenced the rash decisions to make Frederick V accept the Bohemian crown and come into marriage with King James's daughter. So we have, the Winter King and Queen, and then the Rosicrucian Manifestos arising during their reign. As well as we have Francis Bacon at the heart of it all. When you get into Rosicrucianism, you're going to actually see quite a lot that there is this huge common conspiracy of Francis Bacon wearing the Shakespearean mask. So essentially that Francis Bacon actually wrote all of the Shakespeare plays, as well as Francis Bacon is the one at the heart and the root of the whole entire Rosicrucian agenda. So what we're going to be getting into is the utopia of Francis Bacon. Let's kind of talk about it. So during this time period, science is about to begin. That scientific revolution is about to take off. And this is happening through Francis Bacon and his publication of the New Atlantis. So he heavily is pushing the scientific agenda. We need to be exploring the secrets of nature, and we need to have this sort of harmonization of science and religion. So when he writes his book, The New Atlantis, this book is, again, it's very similar to the Rosicrucians because he's talking about a mysterious society, and this is a story about basically these people who discover this society on this mysterious island, and they're Christian, and they actually have, these healing abilities. So there's a lot of reasons why they kind of tie Francis Bacon into the Rosicrucian movement due to his work, The New Atlantis. As well as, it's really important to note that Francis Bacon was a very powerful politician. He was the advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. And, Queen Elizabeth I, she was really bringing back Protestantism and religious tolerance to England. We also know, obviously, like I just said, that she was very closely tied to John Dee and a lot of these occult movements. So, we kind of have to look at who is influencing what and who is influencing the Protestant Reformation. Essentially, were some very important royals who were also very closely tied to movements like Rosicrucianism. So then after Queen Elizabeth I, then who do we have? We have King James. You know, Francis Bacon was very close to, you know, not only Queen Elizabeth I, and was in her court, but he also was very close to King James. But what's more important to talk about today is his daughter in particular. So they say that this was a Rosicrucian marriage, as well as they were chosen as Bohemian king and queen for this Rosicrucian agenda. And more specifically, you know, we see them obviously heralding the Protestant movement further. You know, as Frederick V was Protestant, as well as Elizabeth, you know, and obviously her father. What we're going to be looking at specifically is something very interesting that's actually not talked about. I really don't hear this talked about even in, you know, circles where people are talking about Rosicrucianism. So this is what's really fascinating. I actually was so beyond shocked when I found this out. There was a man named Ben Jonson. So Ben Jonson was actually a poet. And specifically, he actually wrote a couple works on alchemy, kind of incorporated alchemy into some of his sort of satire plays. But this one specifically, called The Fortunate Isles and Their Union, was a Rosicrucian themed mass that was performed before King James as the last Jacobean mass ever. So this is a humongous deal. Due to the fact that this mask play was not only performed before King James, heavily talks about the Rosicrucians in this mask play. And so me being me, I of course have to find the evidence. I'm like, where's the proof? So I found the play. I had to download it as a PDF, and I looked and I read it, and it actually talks about the Rosicrucians. So as you guys know, royals were very, very heavily into these types of things, like Shakespeare, obviously. So Ben Jonson was kind of, you know, the contemporary to Shakespeare. I'm going to put up on the screen a screenshot of this play and where it talks about the Rosicrucians. I actually highlighted it. And so he actually describes the Rosicrucians as an airy order. So essentially an invisible order. And what's really, really fascinating is he actually describes it as an invisible college with wings and wheels. Now, what's so absolutely fascinating about this is that there actually is an image based off of the Rosicrucians / Invisible College with this college with wings and wheels. So essentially, this really was in the minds of these men. And the Rosicrucians must have been somewhat of a big deal. I think it's important to kind of also talk about Shakespeare and sort of that Shakespearean Rosicrucian connection. So Frederick V and Elizabeth Stuart, during their short winter reign, they were lovers of knowledge. They knew actually about Bacon's New Atlantis and his sort of utopian ideals. So they owned his book. As well as they were also visited by the infamous Shakespeare, and Shakespeare actually gave several performances. Specifically, The Tempest was actually performed at their wedding. So shortly after the manifestos arose, there was this time of when there were commenters on the Rosicrucian Manifestos. And so we have these Rosicrucian apologists, as well as we have figures like Theodore de Bry, who are publishing political emblem books, specifically on Elizabeth and Frederick's reign. But Theodore de Bry also published several Rosicrucian apologists and their works on commentaries on the Rosicrucians. So we can see that this whole movement is very closely knit. Something I want to show you really quickly is I actually have the political emblem book that was published based off of their reign. I actually found it, and I got it shipped to me from Germany. So this is the book. Really quickly, I did want to show this in the video. Lovely, iconic emblem of the Palatine lion holding the Book of Wisdom. So to kind of give an example of, you know, these apologists during this time period and what they said about the manifestos. During this huge uproar of debate of, were the Rosicrucians real? No, they weren't. Yes, they were. That whole thing. There were these apologists, and one of them was Michael Mayer. So Michael Mayer actually writes, "What is contained in the Fama and the Confessio is true. It is a very childish objection that the Brotherhood has promised so much and performed so little. With them, as elsewhere, many are called, but few are chosen. And then he goes on to say, the masters of the order hold out the rose, but they impose the cross on those who are entering. And so there's sort of this whole, idea of the worthy and the profane, right? There's that common theme here. And so, there's that debate of whether, this is completely a hoax and it's a joke and it doesn't exist, or there really is a shadowy, mysterious secret society that's just choosing very few members to join. But also that they were rumored to go in between different realms. And I think it was rumored that the Rosicrucians visited, I forget which royal, but there was a king or a queen that they visited and they healed. So a lot is going on here. A lot is going on, right? And also what's so fascinating is it wasn't like a cult, because no one was coming out as the leader or the founder, right? So they weren't trying to, bring about attraction. They weren't really wanting to be known. And so that's also what's so beyond fascinating about this. Now that we kind of have an understanding of this mysterious, society that arose, and the movement surrounding it, what happened afterwards? The Royal Society of London was one of the first scientific organizations that formed through the scientific revolution. So we have figures like Elias Ashmole, one of the first ever recorded English Freemasons who partook in this society. And it was, given by the Royal Charter by Charles II. Robert Boyle actually mentions that the Royal Society of London is the Invisible College. And so I think that this is a really important thing to note, because where does the Invisible College come from? When you look into this, you actually see that the Invisible College is tied in with that Ben Jonson's mask play that we talked about earlier. So as we know, the Invisible College is tied to the Rosicrucians, and now we see that it is also tied to one of the first scientific organizations that sort of heralded what now is modern science. So that's what's absolutely fascinating about the Rosicrucian movement in general, is not only was it this mystical secret society, but it quite literally formed the Royal Society of London and the forming of science. With Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle, they studied alchemy, as well as they most likely actually, commented on the Rosicrucian Manifestos. So there's all of these interesting connections, right? As well as we have, Elias Ashmole and Sir Robert Murray, these two first recorded Freemasons that were a part of the Royal Society of London. So now we see Freemasonry coming into the picture. And so there's just so much happening. As well as I should also mention that Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism were kind of very heavily tied, because the first time that we hear something written about a Mason word was actually also tied in with Rosy Cross. So I'm going to actually read this. So the quote reads, "For what we do prestige is not in gross, for we the brethren of the Rosy Cross, we have the Mason word and the second sight. Things for to come we can foretell all right." As well as something else that I would love to share with you guys is my Rosicrucian tattoo. Okay, so I wanted to share this with you guys actually before I end the video. So I actually have the Mystic Rose tattooed. This is a Rosicrucian emblem from the 17th century. It actually is in one of Robert Flood's works. I think it was on the front cover of Robert Flood's works. So one of the Rosicrucian apologists. So this is actually a Latin phrase. It says da rosa melipibus, and it means the rose gives the bees honey. Now the symbol itself actually symbolizes the hidden word that's locked up inside the rose. We've got the bees here, and the bees represent labor, and the honey here represents wisdom. So essentially, like we were saying earlier with that quote, the hidden word in the second sight, this symbol itself actually represents that. And as well as the rose's thorns represent sort of that protective aspect of the profane trying to get near the hidden wisdoms, the royal arcana. So without further ado, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video on Rosicrucianism. Without further ado, may the rose bloom upon your cross.